I could pursue because of that memo. If he's asked about collusion, does this represent collusion, a Trump Tower meeting with Russians and Donald Trump Jr.? Do you believe that's collusion? Will he just say, I was not asked to pursue collusion, I could find no criminal conspiracy? So if he sticks to the strict letter of the Mueller report, we may not learn a lot new, but if he's willing to, as Joe says, talk about how he got there and talk about his interpretation of some of the evidence he found, it could be a big day for Democrats, and it could be a bad day for President Trump.
Right. Well, Willie, I've talked with a couple members of the Judiciary and Intel committees this morning, and what they tell me is that they are going to focus very heavily on the 5 specific acts of obstruction, and they're going to try to detail and tell the story, bring this to life for the American people. It's one thing reading about this on a 440-some-odd page report. It's another thing when you hear the person actually, even if he just reads it strictly from the report, say it out loud in that type of setting, the power of a congressional hearing and all the trappings and the wall-to-wall coverage, trying to bring that to life. One other member told me that their real goal is to try to tie the underlying acts of obstruction of justice with the underlying effort to have Russia interfere in the election and to link those two together. And at the end of the day, their belief is, for the Democrats, that the people who commit these type of things, who obstruct, they're guilty. People who tell the truth are innocent. We've seen time and again now, whether it's the Oversight Committee, Judiciary Committee, Intel Committee, anytime they ask this administration or anyone part of the Trump campaign to come before them, to answer subpoena, to answer questions, they get stonewalled. They think there's a reason for that. So they see this hearing as the one and best chance that they're going to have, not just to make the case for why the Mueller report is important, credible, substantive, but why going forward their oversight activities are so important and why the courts must uphold them. Remember, this is a permanent record. This is a documented, transcripted hearing that will certainly be cited in the upcoming court cases going on with the Trump administration trying to block oversight.
Yeah, so then I guess, Yamiche, the next question is, this report, if you read it word for word, it's hard not to think impeachment would be the next step. So how does Nancy Pelosi handle that, navigate that, especially for the part of the caucus that really wants to impeach President Trump when they have actual legitimate reasons sitting in front of them, spoken over the airwaves by Bob Mueller?
Well, Nancy Pelosi is going to have to really watch this hearing and make the decision of whether or not she wants to move off of what she said has been a cautious look into impeachment, but not actually wanting to go as far as support impeachment. There are, of course, a growing number of people in her caucus who feel as though the president every day, not only through what we learned in the Mueller report, but also through his actions in the last couple of weeks, is really making the case that he should be impeached. But I think that if Robert Mueller doesn't go outside the 4 walls of the report, it's really going to be coming down to whether or not there's a political storm brewing, and whether or not Nancy Pelosi feels that that storm is big enough to necessitate moving her position. I will also say that I think the president, in his most recent tweets this morning, also show that he's very concerned about Robert Mueller's testimony, mainly because of that surprise development that we got yesterday, which is that he's going to have Aaron Zebley, a longtime aide and someone who was described as a deputy special counsel, sitting next to him. The president's tweeting that he would never have agreed to letting Aaron Zebley sit next to Robert Mueller, but every witness is allowed to have counsel. So Republicans on both the House Intel and House Judiciary brokered the deal that Aaron could sit there. He's actually going to be sworn into as a witness in the Intel testimony. So there could be fireworks here, and President Trump is already signaling that he's a bit worried about that.
Yeah, Joe, on that point, the president, in 2 tweets just in the last hour and one in just in the last few minutes, has shown us what his strategy for the day is to undermine this session by saying that Aaron Zebley, the longtime aide, he was the chief of staff when Bob Mueller was the director of the FBI, that he shouldn't be there. This was never agreed to. President Trump calls Zebley a never-Trumper. The New York Times reports this morning Zebley has no known party affiliation. Washington Post reports that he's never donated to a candidate from either party. And, of course, we should remind our viewers that Robert Mueller himself is a longtime Republican.
Longtime Republican, as is everybody else that was a part of the congressional investigation when Republicans ran both sides of Pennsylvania Avenue. John Heilemann, it's funny, actually, listening to the president panicking and bringing up a guy's name that absolutely nobody has ever heard of before. He's desperate because a poll And the president, as you know, follows polls very closely. A poll comes out that, like, what, 60%? Alex, is it 60% of Republicans think that Robert Mueller conducted a fair investigation?
That's right, 60.
So, yeah, so when you're the president of the United States and you have 60% of the people in your own party believing that Robert Mueller conducted a fair investigation after, may I remind everyone, after the president called it a witch hunt for a year and a half or so, repeatedly, now the poor guy, and I kind of feel sorry for him this morning, fumbling with his phone, trying to find something to attack. He gets this guy that nobody's heard of, calls him an ever-Trumper, and we don't know if this guy has any party affiliation. And all he's going to be doing is just going to, like, whispering into Robert Mueller's ear. It's really, I think, rather sad.
Well, it's sad and also indicative of the notion that, you know, we've been hearing this reporting, I would say, in the last 24 hours coming out of the White House. And I'm not disparaging the journalists providing it, because I'm sure this is what they're being told by the White House, which is that, you know, Trump's not worried anymore. The storm has passed. They were much more concerned 6 months ago. And there's no doubt that things have turned in the president's favor over the course of the last 3 months for reasons that we've discussed. But I think the idea that the president is not concerned about this day, that he's not worried about the impact of it, I think is ridiculous. And you can see it already coming through in these tweets and the way that you just described. I just want to go back, though, quickly to this question of Robert Mueller, because I can't say it more strongly. It's like, you know, Bob Mueller, we heard yesterday from the Attorney General that Mueller sought guidance from the Justice Department, that was what prompted the letter the other night that said, you know, he shouldn't go. They reaffirmed the notion they don't want him to go outside the four corners of the report. And I guess I understand why Bob Mueller would go back to the Justice Department for guidance, I guess. But the reality is Bob Mueller doesn't work for the Justice Department anymore. His obligation is not to the Department of Justice or to Bill Barr, especially after the way the report was treated by Bill Barr. His obligation is to, as I said before, is to history and to the American people right now. And, you know, if you remember, Joe, it's something forgotten by a lot of people, is that after the report came out, after it was mischaracterized, after Mueller's press conference, when he said, you know, the reason that we didn't make a determination on obstruction of justice was because of the OLC policy, Bill Barr himself, in an interview, said that he thought that he expected Mueller to rule on that question. Right. That the reason that he...
exactly. So, John, if the Attorney General of the United States... By the way, you're exactly right, John. The Attorney General of the United States of America attacked Robert Barr, as did a lot of Republicans. I think Rudy Giuliani attacked Robert Mueller, as did a slew of Republicans for not reaching a conclusion on obstruction of justice. So as a private citizen, I think he has a duty, I think he has a responsibility to tell the American people what his conclusions are. And again, these Republicans, including the Attorney General, have already waived any objections they might have by criticizing him previously for not reaching those conclusions.
Correct. The Attorney General of the United States, I think, by telling the world that Bob Mueller was wrong to have interpreted the OLC policy to mean that he could not reach a conclusion on obstruction of justice, by saying that publicly on the record and criticizing Bob Mueller, he has given him effectively, how much more license does Bob Mueller need now to answer that question if it's posed to him directly? The Attorney General himself put it in play. And I think if Bob Mueller refuses to answer that question today, he'll be doing a grave disservice to his own work and a grave disservice to the American people.
Well, and Willie, as a judge might say, you opened the door, counselor. So these Republicans that attacked him opened the door. Robert Mueller should walk through it for the sake of the American people who spent millions and millions of dollars so he could conduct this investigation. And also because, as John Heilman said, history is watching. And I will quote Richard Nixon in saying the American people have a right to know whether their president is a crook. And though we do not expect Robert Mueller to draw that conclusion, he certainly can give us more guidance, because that's what Rudy Giuliani and that's what the Attorney General of the United States said he should have done. He should give us more guidance on his legal basis for saying the things that he said about those 10